We are now live on YouTube. This is the 2018 November 25th meeting of the Joint Foundation Bootstrap team of the Node.js and JSF. We have a full agenda today, and we're joined by a panel of 10 individuals right now. So we'll jump right into it. We have some updates on progress, although the individuals who would be doing this update are not necessarily on the call. So I'll do, my best to follow up on that. The first one that we have an update on is number 40. This is, it updates the README with the repo description and jargon definitions. Specifically, it adds kind of like an entry point to the README itself. And then it has a series of definitions for vocabulary, such as what Bootstrap, contributor, ignition, TLC, CPC, C3, CNCF, COC, MDF, and proposal mean. So primarily, like what are the different things that are used within the README itself. And it outlines eventual deliverables, including a recommendation document to help inform the new foundation's bylaws, the recommendation document to help inform the TLC's charters, a collection of fully drafted governance documents required for ignition. This is a minimal viable foundation. A collection of programs, initiatives, and governance recommendation documents not required for MVF. I think that this is a pretty good start. It has a little bit more information in it than the README does right now. I don't know if people have had a chance to review it. It seems like it's been signed off by myself, Mike Dawson, and Joe Seppi. But I think that we're ready, just about to land that. Does anyone have any thoughts or concerns about that document in its current state?
No, I think we should just go ahead and land it. We can always update it if we need to later, right?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll follow through on that. Michael, would you be able to follow up with a comment in there really quickly, just stating that it's okay to move forward with?
Okay, yeah, doing that now.
Great. So we can then move on to number 48. And yeah, I guess we didn't discuss it. Is there anyone who would have the time to help out with taking notes right now?
I'm going to help a little bit. If other people can help too, that would be great.
I can help, Miles and Michael. I'll jump in.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the next one that we have is number 48, which is the initial version of the CPC charter. Michael, would you like to kick this one off, because this is your PR, and just kind of give people an update of where you're at on this?
Yes. Okay, so I started by looking at the three charters that we already have. So we have the Node Technical Steering Committee charter, we have the JSF charter, and I also looked at the CNCF charter section, or the section for the talk, or is it the TAC, of whatever the appropriate CNCF one is. I looked at that one, and then I tried to pull together a draft for us to start discussing. There was quite a bit of overlap between the Node.js and the JSF ones. Some of the sections were pretty much identical. The CNCF one was structured quite differently, but in terms of content, they generally all had the same kind of content. So I either, in many cases, just, if it was fairly common, put like an actual draft that we can, people can just iterate on and comment on. In a few sections, there were some fundamental differences. And so in those cases, I actually left in the text that we had from the three different ones so that we can look at those. And that's what I was thinking, if we do have time, we might spend some time talking about later on in the meeting. The real key difference is around how the actual group, the Node.js TSC, the TAC, or the talk, how people get elected onto those groups. And then I guess to a slightly lesser extent, how long you're on once you're on was another difference. So in those cases, you can look at the document and it actually has the text from the three of them. That's the context. And if we have time, it would be good to come back later on in the meeting and sort of discuss through that key issue of, how people get elected, because that's one of the things I think some discussion would be good before I go back and revise it to, make a draft we can then sort of iterate more incrementally on.
Excellent. And to be explicit, we do have time scheduled later specifically to dig more into this. Before that, though, does anyone have any specific questions for Michael? Based on what he's laid out, we do have a bit of time still left on the agenda to discuss it. Okay, I'll take that silence, meaning that we can move forward to the next one. This is issue number 45, which is project progression. This is a stage 0 proposal from Tracy. From Jory.
Jory, yeah.
And it's specifically outlining what would the process of a project progressing through the foundation look like. So the governance policy describes how an open source project can formally join the foundation via the project proposal process. It describes the stages a project may be admitted under and what criteria and expectations are for a given stage, as well as the acceptance criteria for a project to move from one stage to another. It also describes the annual review process through which those changes will be evaluated, and made. So benefits of the project progression includes promotion and public visibility of work, deepened alignment with existing projects, mentorship and support, remove possible legal and governance obstacles to adoption and contribution by ensuring all projects adhere to the Foundation's legal code of conduct and IP policy requirements. The proposal has been modified from the CNCF process document. So it outlines the process and what a project proposal must include. And we have some people starting to comment on that list and what makes sense as well as what doesn't make sense compared to what the CNCF had. And then, what's the acceptance process? Is the projects are required to present their proposal at a CPC meeting, and projects have to get accepted by a 2 to 3 supermajority vote of the CPC. It then has a definition of the stages. It defines the sandbox stage. It defines the incubating stage. And then it goes on to define the top level graduate stage. These are, again, names that we haven't necessarily, landed on yet, but I think the internal bits there, are pretty consistent. And then there's a high level document here that's a README that just kind of outlines, what needs to happen and where it's going. I think, to be honest, it has a do not merge label on it. So I don't think that we need to merge it without without anyone saying they're okay with that. But I do think that at the current state of where it's at, that it should be fine to land at stage 0 if we all agree that this is something that we want to work on. And it could be, the stage 1 could be tweaking the language a little bit, or at least making sure that all the deliverables that we want are in place. Do we have any objections to anyone saying to writing in the issue that we're okay with this moving to stage 0 without requiring a meeting to review it so we can get things moving a little faster?
So basically review the comments, address the comments, and then it can land. Is that the...
I don't even think the comments need to be addressed because, the text doesn't, inside of the proposal itself, doesn't need to be locked down until stage 2. So I think, for stage 0, it's just kind of saying hey, this is something we were thinking of adopting.
Yeah, I since people have commented, it probably wouldn't be bad to I don't know, either park or comment that says, hey, we'll do that in the next step or something.
Yeah, that makes sense. Or maybe a document or maybe documenting the comments and things that haven't been dealt with yet.
Yeah, just acknowledge them in some way, and then I don't have a problem with.
Okay, that makes sense. So I can follow up with a comment in there, just kind of unblocking them and making it so that we can move this to stage 0. So maybe for the next meeting, we could be applying for stage 1, and that should speed this up quite a bit. Okay, excellent. So we can move on to the next issue that we have on the agenda. Did it get dropped, I thought. Huh. Seems like we don't have the one thing I thought we had on the agenda. It got dropped somehow. So let's find some time to talk about how often we meet and when we meet really quickly right now. That's issue... That's issue number 13 or 20, no, 21. Let's give, 5 minutes. We may not need it. So we have this is our second time doing this 9 a.m. call. And we are seeing once again that we're missing, quite a bit of people, and quite a bit of the people who, are doing a lot of the work. But with that being said, is there anyone on the call right now who isn't able to make the other call, or who this call is significantly more convenient for?
This is Dan. As probably you might guess, the other call is less convenient for me, but I'm certainly happy to have it at the other time. Which is 7 p.m. in UK time. That is fine with me, honestly.
Is there anyone else on this call who's not able to make the other time? It's important for you to speak up. We want to make sure that we're being inclusive here. Alternatively, if you look at that issue that we were talking about, which is issue number 21, there is a spreadsheet in there, and I'll drop that spreadsheet in the chat really quickly right now, where people can put in their availability, and we wanted to use that as a way to figure out times that work. And so, if that's something that you're able to help out with, if you can please fill that out, perhaps we can move forward with, proposing alternative times in that issue. Does anybody have any particular thoughts on this? Are they happy with what we're doing right now? Do you think that we should drop the 9 a.m. time? Do you think we should pick another secondary time? Anyone have any thoughts on this at all?
I'm like, if we're not getting people who can't get to the other meeting and we get more people at the other meeting time, then I think that other meeting time is better. And if we don't have anybody saying, hey, 9 is going to work out better, it seems like the 2 is the better of the 2 options we have now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I guess with that, I'm going to go ahead and review that spreadsheet and just see if there's one other time that may work better for people, and we can try it. But if not, I think that at this point we may want to decide to just move forward with the 2 p.m. meeting time. Let's keep this on the agenda one more time for next week. I'll have a proposal for next week, and then, we can just move forward with it from there. Any objections to that as an action plan?
Nope.
No, it sounds good. Unless people fill in the spreadsheet to show that other times are better, I think that's what we should do.
Okay, excellent. So just one more call to action on that. If you can, please fill that sheet out. So we can move on to our next item of business now, and we are on time, which makes me happy, which is expectations stage 0. This is rolled out of number 6. It is a stage 0 proposal for the expectations document that we're looking to send to the foundation. sorry, give me 1 second here. Okay, so this is a proposal from Tracy outlining kind of very high level, I'll read it out. Like, with the intent to merge the Node.js and JS Foundation being announced, those interested in the continued support of Node.js and JS related projects are working through expectations and structure for what the potential new foundation could look like. This document is for the initial phase of work for the Bootstrap team to draft requirements that overlap with scope of the board in order to provide an outline and structure of the foundation attuned to the needs of the projects and ecosystem stakeholders who have participated. This document is organized in 2 key areas: concerns that must be included in the foundation bylaws, and those that are communicated expectations that aren't required in our legal documents to proceed, but are vital to managing expectations of project members and ecosystem stakeholders. So currently in bylaw requirements, it has communicated scope for the foundation and board, annual review of staff, NPS, board, programs, support services to projects for accountability and incremental improvements. The foundation staff, executive director, and board should follow a leadership style that prioritizes and promotes the well-being of the project and those who prioritize and promote a healthy project and ecosystem. Project representation on the board, and specifically this is broken down into community representation, should sit on the board directly. Projects should share this representation. Community representation on the board, 3 seats guaranteed for community representation. Board must establish a cross-project council, focus on specific needs of member projects, allow projects to self-organize amongst themselves. Processes are defined and driven by project, e.g. CPC is not structured by the board. Non-corporate member representation in budget and finance subcommittee. Project values should drive foundation focus and priority. No pay to play and technical participation. Earmarking allowed with flexibility in budgeting for concerns and needs of individual projects. Value satisfaction, regular feedback from projects. Explicit acknowledgement and documentation for the ability of projects to leave the foundation. Foundation should document a clear process for trademark usage to enable community not-for-profit efforts. Communicated scope for the foundation and board. So this includes annual review. This seems to be somewhat repetitive, and I think that's the comment that's in there. Executive director required to work directly with projects to gather strategy and budget needs for upcoming roadmaps, included but not limited to brand management per project, budget allocation per project, resource allocation per project. We then have communicated expectations below, but because those are above and beyond the stuff that was being earmarked there specifically for the bylaws, maybe we should focus on that. But there is a section here on expectations of the foundation, a section here on the expectations of the board, and another section on the expectations of the executive director. So, I've laid a bit of the foundation there, and we have quite a number of the foundation staff on hand right now. Does anyone have particular thoughts related to what I just read through, or has anyone had a chance to review this document yet?
So Miles, this is Sarah. I wanted to just jump in for 1 second to touch on your language and the way you opened with this document. Is you were saying we, meaning we, the projects in the Bootstrap committee, were sending this to the board as expectations or to the foundation. This is all one group, and this has been one of the challenges in the language and the conception between the project and the board, or the project and the foundation before. And I want us to just really think about this as a single group. So these are all of the different groups setting our expectations together to make the most awesomest foundation collectively, not a demands to the board or demands to the foundation frame. Because there's also, I think, in there some of the list of like board expectations of the project and that kind of thing. So I think this is really just a great spot where we level set what we think we want from each other, and then build the best foundation from it, not set up as adversarial.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I doubt that was the intent, but it's definitely something we can tweak to improve.
Awesome.
The one comment I had in this is that it still doesn't have any language around the Node.js project getting a board seat. And my suggestion is we write that in, and if it then later gets, discussed out, that would be the way I'd like to see it happen, as opposed to not being there at all.
Are the 3 community seats across the multiple projects, however the different groups charter, the election of it, not enough of that, Michael, or you want it explicitly discussed as Node first?
I think we should have something that says, along the lines of what happened in the CNCF, Node is one of the Constellation projects will have a board seat. And I think we can remove that if we all discuss and agree, but I'd rather that be an explicit decision than it's just not there and we forget about it kind of thing.
Interestingly, all of the charter documents and bylaw documents say 2 developer seats in the CNCF, and then it has been agreed for the first year and now potentially the second year that Kubernetes gets 1 of the seats. It is not actually chartered that way.
Okay. Yeah, that hasn't been discussed in the past, but
yeah. No, it's chartered as two developer seats, and because the Kubernetes community could outvote the entirety of everyone else, we said, why don't we make this 1 Kubernetes and then suggest that everybody vote somewhere else for the second one.
The one thing I just want to avoid is the impression, or by omission, we don't address the expectation that has been stated by some parts of the project.
Yeah. Okay.
And Michael, I guess like the 2 things I would ask for that is like, is this your personal opinion that we should be doing this, or is this something that you think that we should be doing because other people would want that to happen?
It's my personal opinion that we should do this because I want the expectation that I've heard from the rest of the project to be addressed. And
so the slight pushback that I would give there was that we have an open process where anyone can voice anything. So I'd like to see the people who specifically want to see that happen chime in as well.
Okay, so I'll throw myself in as being one of those people, but we have the survey that James did, and we've got, in other discussions, some other people have definitely said that they have that expectation.
Yeah. And then I think over on the Node side, I think we should be the TSC should be having a conversation about who that rep might be. And I think that this may be a good time in general for our project and the JSF as well. When we start talking about these board seats and who would be on these seats, to start defining literally who would be the people that we're thinking about doing that, so we can start getting them, ready for doing those roles effectively. Outside of that, the other bit on this, and it's kind of a similar thing to that last proposal, we have this proposal system that we put in where stage 0, 1, and 2 mean very specific things. And it's only at stage 2 where we're supposed to have consensus and a lock on the actual language. And so I want to ensure that we're actually following that staging process. I don't think that there's any need to be blocking these at all, as long as at the very least, criticism or things that should be changed are documented. But I don't think that we need to be having those changes reflected in the document in order for them to move forward through the stages.
Well, okay. So if it lands, will you block me immediately doing a PR that adds it?
I think that we would have to have a discussion about it. I personally...
But you just said you don't need to have a discussion about one side, but then if you flip it to the other side, you need a discussion. So I'm just playing the, either it is something we should discuss before it's in or out, or it isn't, right?
Yeah, I guess this is something that we haven't really talked through yet, is to who gets to approve what lands in the proposals. Because, the proposal's owned by someone, right? So is it the committee who makes the decision about what lands or doesn't land, or is it the person whose proposal it is? Because this is technically Jory's proposal. And maybe that's something that we need to need to work through.
Yeah, I think we should have it be, it's our proposal, right? Like it shouldn't be, hey, this is mine, and if you want to, if you don't agree, make a counter proposal. That doesn't sound very productive to me.
But perhaps it then makes sense, and I guess this is something that James was talking through, is perhaps we just have a place where we explicitly document things that we do not have consensus on. And then to reach stage 2, we just need to work through all those bits that don't have consensus. So if we look at the expectations doc, for example, oh no, not the expectations doc. This is the, so we have this proposal. If we were to look at, you know, you have the second file here. My internet is going very slow at the moment. Apologies.
Right.
There's the project progression markdown file, and then there's kind of like the README of like outlining the proposal itself. Perhaps we can start a collection of things we don't have consensus on there and start moving the bits that are in the document. But yeah, perhaps it also makes sense to just land that bit about the Constellation project if you think that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like if you really don't believe it matters one way or the other when it's addressed, my preference is that we just add it and then work it out afterwards. That's my ask. But
okay. So we've got 3 minutes left on this agenda item. Does anyone have anything else to add on this for right now?
So Miles, just to note in the minutes, are we agreeing that we're going to put in the seat for node.js TSC and then let people discuss it from that starting point?
I'm going to be really honest. I have mixed feelings on it, and I think that we should move that to the PR for discussion. I don't think we have everyone in this room to make that decision right now. Michael, would you think that's a fair way of putting it?
yeah, no, that's fair.
Okay, so we're not going to move it to stage 0, but just keep it open until that's resolved.
Independent of this, I think similarly to the expectations document, I think that we should move to, or at least call to move it to stage 0 as long as all of the bits that do not currently have consensus are appropriately documented and we have consensus around how it's documented from the people who do not have consensus. If that was a bit of a mouthful, but I think it made sense.
Okay, if you can just review how I captured the minutes just to make sure I got it right. Thanks.
But I guess just to be really explicit here, as long as we document all the bits that do not have consensus in a consistent way, does anyone object to number 45 landing as stage 0 between now and the next meeting?
I guess I think it's back to the issue to get consensus on that, get consensus that we can land what's there.
Okay. Okay, so with that, let's move on to the last agenda item that we have. We have 25 minutes earmarked for it, which is drafting initial governance for Merge Foundation. This is number 33. There is a slide deck that was put together by Mike Dolan. I just dropped it into the chat. We've got this is the high level overview of what does the governance of the foundation itself look like. This includes, you know, like what's the role of the board? What's the role of the CPC? What's the role of the C3? What are top level projects? What are the stages that projects go through? We had briefly talked earlier in this meeting about 2 proposals, specifically the initial CPC charter and the project progression. Both of those kind of play into this. There's also some other issues that are open, including number 37, what does the CPC look like? And 38, what does the C3 look like? I believe that these two issues were opened by this was by Tyranny, which was the CPC one, and the C3 one was similarly opened by Tyranny. What I was hoping that we could use this time for was to dig back into that document that we started following the other day, talking about kind of the high level bits of this foundation, and kind of going through the structure once more. I think one of the things we left the last conversation about, we were just talking about these top level committees and what are the responsibilities of the top level committees, and whether or not we needed two different top level committees or if one would be sufficient, and specifically starting to break down what the responsibilities of the two are. And I believe that that's what the two issues, number 37 and number 38, are digging into. Michael, I believe you've been active in those two issues. Do you have a summary that you can give us as to the discussion that's gone on in there?
So 37 and 38, right? Those two. So, you know, basically they came out of a conversation where we were discussing some of the things. It's like, well, okay, what are the two groups going to be looking like? I think there hasn't been a huge amount of discussion on the CPC one. I think the best way to dive into that is to actually go back to what was in the governance doc I put together, because it has the three different existing models. And so that's a good starting point. In terms of the C3, I'm trying to refresh my memory. Right. I think the discussion mostly there was around, though, the model for electing the director for the C3. And we just reiterated, you know, the discussion that had come out of the individual membership discussions, where it was like anybody from the, actually, sorry. No, I'll go back to now I'm swapping in. So basically one model that we discussed was that anybody in the project can be a member, but they need to be certified by the ComCom, which is the model used in the moderation team. So that would be a similar, and I'm actually trying to think, that's the comment I made, but I'm trying to remember how that actually makes sense now. So I'm doing a very bad job, but there's not a lot of discussion in those issues. Joe has started a document to flesh out some more details, in which he basically took what we have for some of the governance for the ComCom and started to generalize it for the C3.
Yeah, I took Giuseppe here. I took the ComCom README and kind of converted it to what the C3 could look like, and then also kind of started to look at what responsibilities a group like this might have. And my thought is to try and figure out what the shape would look like of the C3, and then we can see if it makes sense, if it overlaps enough with the CPC to have them be one group, or you know, get a good picture on what we think it would look like.
Yeah, I think the good list that you have there is like the potential areas of focus. If you do want to just give a short walk through those, that would be
sure. Yeah, I posted the link into the chat here on Zoom, but I'll run through the potential areas of focus here for the C3 that I know Adam and Tierney have contributed a little bit to this as well. Community cultivation of advocacy, advice, and support for community cultivation, advocacy, advice, and support for internationalization, same for mentorship, provide an end user feedback framework that could be born out of the Node.js efforts, inclusivity and diversity angles, focus contributor efforts specifically for underrepresented minority groups, and language and documentation auditing as requested. shared resources, tooling, and funding for projects in CommonJS, such as event tooling and meetup and conference resources, documentation, guides, and suggestions, social media resources like access to paid social media tools, and resources on tone, language, neutrality, crisis response, as well as marketing, content, and design assistance, and swag production. And then I also just took some of the bullet points from the slide deck that Miles just shared and added those in here as well, so we can kind of hone this all down.
I'm sorry, this is Dan. Where is this list that you just went through? Is this in the document? Apologies for asking you to wind back for a second, yeah. But I don't understand. I was following, but are we talking about the CCC or are we talking about the CPC at this point?
This is for the community-oriented C3, the CCC.
Right.
This is from a document that is linked to from the issue, and I also posted it into the Zoom chat.
Okay. Got it.
Google Doc. Yeah. I can drop the link in the notes.
I got it. Yeah.
Got it? Okay.
Right, and I think it's sort of interesting to look at that versus the list that I had for the responsibilities for the CPC, which I'll paste in the chat. So those were like, and these came from, looking at the 3 different charters. Ensuring collaboration is the driving principle within the project, between foundation projects and between the foundation projects and the broader community. Defining and maintaining neutral consensus for the technical vision of the foundation. Approving new projects within the scope of the foundation set by the governing board as outlined in XXX, with XXX being the staging process. And creating a conceptual architecture for how the projects fit together. Aligning projects, removing or archiving projects as outlined in the staging process, defining common practices to be implemented across the foundation projects, if any. The CPC is also responsible for meeting technical conflicts between the foundation projects when attempts to resolve those conflicts within the project were unsuccessful. And the CPC serves as the foundation's primary technical liaison body with external open source projects.
Just one other question about the C3 list for a second. One of the things that we've been talking about when it comes to diversity and inclusion has been the set of guidelines, escalation procedures for the code of conduct, for instance, and is that something that the C3 would play a role if, in the process, if there are, at what point we were talking at one point about the foundation playing a role in helping when issues escalate from, or if and when issues escalate up from an individual project, and is that something the C3 would play a role in, or what? And if so, is that something that should be reflected in that list? Silence.
I think it's a good. So go ahead.
You go ahead, Michael.
Oh no, you can go first.
I think it's a very good question. We handle this fairly well, I guess, with an asterisk there in the Node Foundation. But I think the moderation team, which we have set out, doesn't necessarily fall under either of the top level committees' purview, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, the moderation team today falls under I think it's both the top level committees today. I think going forward, like, I think, you know, that we should have a well-defined escalation process. And as part of that, I think both committees are going to have to be involved if there's two committees. Now, I mean, I guess, and in the case, it's going to have to be that there's the project's escalation process, but then do we provide at the sort of umbrella level, sort of, you know, an appeal process, or
well, or providing or deciding when additional resources need to be brought to bear, like for instance, third-party moderation,
Yep.
or something like that. I mean, that's definitely something that we discussed, or we have discussed at some point within the boards, being a role that the joint foundation could play or should play. I'm keen for that to be part of the discussion, because I think it is one of the values that having the foundation provides. But then, yeah, at some point, somebody's going to make a decision about, you know, okay, this issue is sufficiently intractable that additional resources need to be brought to bear from the foundation to help out, or a request needs to be made from the project for those resources. I think it probably wouldn't be a good idea for that responsibility to be shared across two different committees, because then you're going to inevitably end up with delays, as both of those committees have different meeting schedules, and, you know, life gets in the way of people making decisions and stuff like that. So, like, it feels to me like there should be something, sorry, this is probably a more detailed conversation than we should be having on this call. It should more be brought to the issue itself, but just something to raise.
Yeah.
But Daniel, I apologies, Miles. Daniel, I think there's a separation, though, of having available resources and having things escalated to those available resources, which would happen out of the project, versus having this anywhere in charters or documentation that someone needs to make a decision that there is intervention from these groups, if that makes sense. Because the way your language was, the way you described it, I couldn't tell if you thought that the Cross Project Council or the board or some magical foundation should provide the resources. Totally down with that, for when the projects want to escalate to it, or set up bounds where there is intervention by these groups, which is way more from the top, and I don't like that nearly as much. So I wasn't quite sure what you were saying.
No, I was more saying the first thing.
Okay, perfect. Then we're in total agreement.
Yeah. It should be on a poll basis.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
And now, apologies, I really do have to leave. My dentist is going to be waiting.
So
good luck.
The thing I wanted to add, Dan, to what you were saying, and built on what Sarah was just saying a bit, I think like the success that we've seen in the Node project with moderation has mostly been like due to the fact, like, while we do have a moderation team that handles escalations, a good chunk of the things that are being dealt with are mostly handled by collaborators, because we have clear process and they're empowered to do so. I'm not sure that and a good chunk of that is that people feel ownership over the code, and they feel like ownership over the GitHub repo, and they feel empowered to step forward and to moderate, which is something that took a long time to get our project there. So I think that we really should be thinking about this as a bottom-up approach. Perhaps, similarly to in the Node project, we have an admin repo where both the TSC and the ComCom collaborate on shared documents. The CPC and the C3, or a combination of both, could be responsible for maintaining shared documents that outline a process that projects in the foundation participate in. That becomes more of a support structure than being relied on as a service, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that as we, the CPC and C3 are really a step away from the projects. So it may be easier to separate responsibilities. right? Like, because you were basically, as you mentioned before, some of the things like the moderation, people are very engaged because it's there's ownership in the repo and so forth. And I think these two groups being a step back from the projects, it may actually be okay to say, well, the C3 is the place where, these kinds of issues would be dealt with as a division. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know if anybody has the same thought, but it strikes me that it may be easier to separate them out versus, in the project itself, they're much more entwined because everybody's working in the same repos together.
Yeah. But I think this plays into like that original question as well, which is like, what is the role of the CPC versus the C3?
Right.
And what defines it so much that we need two separate bodies, aside from kind of having the board seats lead that? I think one of the things we do need to challenge ourselves as well is to ensure that, like, we've experienced problems in the Node project before with hierarchy, and specifically with like different levels of hierarchy making people feel not empowered or like they can't accomplish things. So I do want to challenge us to, like, as we're working on structuring these bodies, that we think of them as ones that serve the projects rather than direct the projects. So, like, the CPC should be a space that enables things that projects want to do rather than dictating how projects will do things.
I think in general, having fewer three-letter acronyms would be better than having more three-letter acronyms. I'm already confused, and I'm on the board of one of these things. So, I mean, is it realistic to merge the two bodies or to have one thing? I mean, what do people think?
I think we need Tracy to have a good discussion on that, because I think she's mentioned in the past that she would prefer to. So I think we should have that discussion. An easy test would be, could we take the responsibilities that Joe outlined and stick them into the CPC charter along with the list of the other responsibilities, and does that all fit together and that makes sense? Or are there reasons? And I think, one of the reasons called out in the past is, having the separate group with a board representation shows that we're really serious about those things, right? They've got more focus. They've got a representation. So there's that angle of it, as well as it makes it a little bit easier if people are only interested in the technical side or the sort of community side. It's easier to get involved in one that has a focus on that.
But I guess that's the challenge, Michael, is like the CPC is not a technical body, right?
Right, and that's where, like, I'm, yes, and that's why I'm starting to come around to, does there really need to be a separation because it's one level up, right? Versus, like, I shouldn't say up, it's one level more, a step further away from the projects itself.
Yeah. And I think, like, maybe further defining the representation, like who are on these groups and what are the purposes and responsibilities of these groups. We talked about making a project board, and maybe I should just kick that off. But I think clearly defining why they have different responsibilities will be, a huge boon to moving forward with that. I think also, there's a need for certain bodies to exist to enable things, like the CPC, for example, existing as a means to keep track of like what projects are joining and to act as kind of like the arbitrators of that. Like that has a really, really clear structure. But outside of that, if we're just talking about like initiatives and programs and stuff, like perhaps that is where the C3 differentiates, because the CPC could be focused on project representation and the C3 could be focused on programs. But I guess we want to, I think, encourage many different programs working within the foundation that involve multiple people from different projects collaborating. And so how do we kind of maximize that? I think, how do we serve that goal? I think will help us kind of figure out the structure. With that being said, we have 5 minutes left on the call structure. Do we have any specific stuff that people feel we haven't gotten to yet, or hanging questions on the conversations that we've been having so far?
Actually, I'm thinking one thought, sort of semi-unrelated to what you just said, but related a bit, is the one discussion around how people get elected onto these bodies. That actually could also play in significantly into whether one or two makes sense.
Yep.
Right? Like if,
I'm
go
still
ahead.
very much a fan that like anyone who's on any team should be like similar to what we've done with this Bootstrap team, right? Like I don't think that they should be elected positions, and I don't think that they should be limited in engagement. I think part of the reason why this Bootstrap team is being productive and open is because, you know, as long as you're participating in the foundations, you're able to participate in this group.
Right. So that's where, like, you know, the three, you know, there's 3 different models in the existing charters, you know, in the CNCF, and I guess actually even in the JSF charters, you know, the foundation members actually get to appoint a number of the seats.
Mm-hmm.
Versus and yeah, so it's like, I think if we, maybe that's something we need to dig in next, is like how, whether there's one, whether there's two, what is our consensus on how people will get onto those? Because I think that could make a big difference as to whether people are comfortable having just one or not.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. I think also when we're talking about something like, you know, the CPC having to have a supermajority vote for new projects coming in, what does voting even mean? Who's the representations? Who votes? Is it an equal vote? Is it just top level projects who vote? Who's a top level project? I guess like one of the problems here is all of this is so interconnected that like, yeah, maybe we need a bit of a roadmap even to kind of outline all the things that we need to be doing here.
If I might suggest, the CPC and the other projects, as Michael noted, you know, there is a composition to the group. Part of that's because of just what they tried to do in the charter construction, Michael, was I think they were trying to put quality of control in. They were trying to quality control in to make sure that the projects coming in and the ones being approved were ones that were beneficial to the ecosystem, truly, you know, move the ball forward. And so I think that was sort of their way of doing it. But if you look at the number of things that you're all trying to figure out for the C3 and the CPC, a number of these things, as Miles noted, are really volunteer driven. And so you want to get as many people as possible to the table to help. So, you know, I do think there might be a way to thread this needle if you all think about, you know, making this a very open, inclusive body, but you know, maybe just the one area that does need some quality control around project approval is somewhat limited to, say, the one representative from each of the projects voting or something like that, and just keep, you know, that's the only thing that, you know, requires, you know, a vote type of thing. Everything else is basically going to run as consensus, I would imagine, just similar to how you do everything else. But I don't know if that's a way to think about it. But
yeah, no, that's certainly, that is a good way to, a good thing to keep in mind, is like, as opposed to breaking it into a different group, maybe maybe making it that just that one aspect has a different voting, or you could even think that there's like, is there a group which sole role is reviewing the, you know, new projects that get accepted, and then, you know, there's a different body that's looking at all the other things that we, you know, the forward looking stuff and supporting the projects and all those kinds of things.
So with that being said, we've hit our time. I do want to point out that at one point during the meeting, we did have 16 panelists, which is not that significantly smaller than what we had at the last time, which was 20. So just kind of throwing that out there for the times. I'll make sure that that's documented. Thanks everyone for joining today. We'll be meeting next week at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Let's stop the stream.